You're building a cartoony kind of scene and you want a little environment with a hill and a bunch of trees. And obviously, if you're going to do something like that, you don't want to build every single individual tree. You'd want to create one and then maybe copy it across a surface. So what I'm going to do here is have a look at how we can build an object out of a couple of objects. So we'll make a tree, we'll make a trunk, and then a top of the tree, a round bit where the leaves are, and we'll spread them across a landscape. So let's make a tree for a start. So this is super basic. This is just an example, and our tree is going to be a very, very simple shape. And I'm going to make it out of a cylinder for the trunk. Oops, here's my cylinder. Let's make that a little bit thinner. There's my tree trunk. And I'm just going to make a sphere to sit on top of this to make a very basic tree. Object, sphere, and let's put this on the top. Maybe I'll scale it down a little bit. There's my tree. It's pretty awesome. This is high-level modeling we're doing here. Okay, so that's my tree. So I want to clone this, and I want a landscape to put it on. So let's make a landscape as well. Now, Cinema 4D's got a landscape tool built in, so I can go to the Create menu, go to Objects, and right down the bottom of my Objects list, I've got a landscape. And I've got a little hill, a couple of hills and landscapey looking object. My tree looks pretty huge. So what I might just do is make my landscape 10 times as big. So if I've got it selected, I can go to its Object tab and just make it 10 times as big in all the 3 axes. And now I've got a better sized landscape. Okay, so what we're going to do now is clone that tree and spread it all over the landscape. So I'm going to create a cloner. So MoGraph cloner. Now at the moment my sphere and my cylinder are just a sphere and a cylinder. If I put those into the cloner, let's see what happens. If I drag and drop both of those into the cloner, oops, there we go, in the cloner, and I'm not quite sure what's going on here. Let's have a look. Let's make a few more of them. It seems that I've just got a bunch of spheres on top of each other. Let's spread them out a little bit more. Okay. So my tree has kind of detached itself, the trunk from the top part. So what's happening here is when you put multiple objects in a cloner, the cloner will alternate each object. So the first clone is a sphere, the second one's a cylinder. Next one's a sphere, next one's a cylinder, and so on, because that's what I've got in my cloner. What I really want is I want those objects to be treated as one object, and then that one object, my tree object, will then be cloned. So the easiest way to do that is actually just to group these two before I put them in the cloner. So I can select my sphere and my cylinder, hit Option G to group, and now I've got this tree shape. I'll just spread mine apart a little bit more. So there we go. Now it's actually sticking together as a tree shape. So that's really important to understand, is you can put multiple objects in a cloner and it'll clone them alternately. Or if you want things cloned sort of as clumps, together, if you group it, the cloner is just seeing this group. And just because I want to keep my scene tidy, that group there, I'm just going to rename it tree. Okay, so my tree is cloned now, but I want to spread it all over this landscape. So one of the great things about the cloner, if I select this, is this mode button. So at the moment it's a linear set of clones. It's a line. They're in a straight line going from the ground plane up in the y-axis. Rather than just make a line of clones, I can actually make clones across an object. So this is a really powerful tool, and it lets you spread clones all over another object. So I'm going to change this mode in my cloner to object. Now that I've done that, I've got an object field in my cloner. What I need to do is just drag and drop my landscape into here. So this is saying clone this tree across this object, whatever this object is. So in one move, I'm just going to click and drag my landscape, drop it in there, and now I've got a bunch of dead trees on my landscape. But at least they're on landscape, so that's a good start. So make sure you've got your cloner selected, make sure the mode is set to object, and then in this object field, drag and drop the object that you want to spread your clones over. Okay, so this is getting there. This is a good start. So the next thing we want to do is think about how are these objects spread across the surface. And we can see they are actually lying on the surface, which is great. The problem is mine are lying down flat. So how can I fix that? What I'm going to do for this example is I'm going to assume that my trees want to stand straight up and down. So if we have a look just underneath the object in our cloner, we've got this thing called an up vector. A vector is just a direction. It's a fancy word for a direction. So basically it's saying is what is the up direction for your tree? And I want the up direction to be our normal up and down axis, which is the y-axis. So the up vector, I want to make that the positive y-axis. That hasn't fixed things yet. The other thing I want to do is have a look at this align clone button. We've got a little tick box there. If I turn that off, now my trees are actually standing up and down. They're halfway through the landscape, but they're standing up and down. So what the align button does is it looks at the angle of the surface and it tries to lay the object along the angle of the surface using this value. Now I don't actually want that, I just want them sitting straight up and down, so I'm going to turn off this align. So we're getting there, we're almost there. The only problem is the trees are sticking through the bottom of the landscape. Now there's a couple of ways of fixing that. The simplest way is to go to the transform tab on your cloner. And the transform is any kind of move, scale or rotation that gets done to all of the clones after they've been cloned. And what we can do is we can move it in the X, Z or Y direction. So now we've got, if we use that Y direction, our up and down axis, we can shift our clones and now they're sitting all over the surface. If we want to, now that our system is working, now our cloner is working, we can go back to the object tab. We could add more trees by upping the count, and we can build ourselves a little virtual forest. So that's pretty cool. So the important thing there, as I said, is that if we've got an object made from a group of objects, we can clone that, and then in our cloner we can use our align tool and our up vectors and our transform tools to position our clones all over the surface. That's pretty fancy. Okay, and one more thing I'll show you here while we're dealing with cloners. Once we've cloned things, we can apply effectors, which are just effects. And this is where the power of the MoGraph tool set really starts to kick in. I'm just going to show you a really basic example of how an effector would work. Say we want these trees to be a little more random. At the moment they're all exactly the same size and shape. I'd quite like some different sized ones. So if I select my cloner, make sure it's selected first, I can go to my MoGraph menu, go to the effector tab here, and I can choose a random effector. So my random effector, if I have a look at its effector tab, it's got a strength value which turns that on or off. Where it really gets interesting is in this parameter tab, and this is telling us what am I randomizing here. So at the moment what's turned on is the position. I don't want to randomize the position, I want to randomize the scale of these things. So I'm going to turn on random scale, and I want them to be different sizes, but I want them to be uniformly different sizes. I don't want them to be squashed in one axis or stretched out. I just want little versions of this and big ones. So I'm going to uniformly scale them in all three axes. So I'm just going to turn on that little tick, uniform scale. And now if I start to click and drag this scale value around, we can see now we get a real variety of sizes of trees. So that's pretty cool. Now we've got a bit of, it's not quite so uniform looking. We've got a bit of randomness, and that's looking pretty good. So this is a really basic example of how our MoGraph cloner works. We can clone stuff, and effectors can do additional effects basically on top of our clones.